Under the towering crystal dome of the Zareth Imperial Hall, thousands of alien dignitaries gathered, their jeweled armor glinting in the soft gold light that poured from the ceiling. Banners of conquest hung high above, each one representing a world the Empire had conquered. The stars themselves seemed to bow before them, for the Zareth Empire ruled half the galaxy. Their ships darkened skies. Their name carried weight that crushed entire civilizations, and in their arrogance they believed themselves gods, untouchable and eternal. The sound of laughter filled the air like thunder as the Emperor's ministers gathered around the central hollow table, a map of the stars spinning slowly, glowing red in places where rebellion had been extinguished, glowing green where submission was complete. But there, in one small corner of the map, on a lonely blue planet circling a dying yellow sun, was a mark that flickered faintly. Earth. The court generals chuckled, exchanging mocking looks as the name appeared. "A forgotten species," said Lord Varen, the High Admiral of the fleet, his voice smooth and dripping with disdain. "They still breathe oxygen. Still use projectile weapons, can you imagine? They barely escaped their own gravity well when we were already harvesting stars." The hall erupted in laughter, alien nobles waving their hands dismissively. "Humans," another voice sneered, "the most emotional creatures ever recorded, always crying, always fighting, always hoping." Laughter again, louder this time, echoing against the walls like music to their arrogance. The Emperor himself leaned forward on his throne, his golden eyes glimmering with amusement. "Hope," he repeated, tasting the word as if it were a delicacy. A primitive concept for a primitive race, his smirk widened. "Let them live, they are no threat to us." His advisors nodded eagerly. "Yes, Your Radiance, they will destroy themselves soon enough." And that was the end of the conversation for them. A single word, Earth, dismissed and forgotten, drowned beneath laughter that filled the halls of power. But far from the glittering capital of Zareth, beyond the reach of their arrogant eyes, humanity listened, humanity remembered because they always remembered. Even when broken, even when bleeding, they remembered everything. In the quiet rooms of Earth's underground command centers, in the silence of orbital stations drifting above Neptune, in the deep tunnels carved beneath Mars, people whispered about the meeting. Someone had intercepted the broadcast. A fragment of the Emperor's laughter carried across the void, and it spread like a spark in dry grass. The insult became a wound. The wound became a promise, and that promise ignited something deep within humanity, something ancient, something that had always been there, buried beneath centuries of peace and loss. The instinct to survive, to fight when no one believed they could, to rise when everyone else turned away. It was an instinct older than history, and now it had awakened. In a hidden base beneath the frozen surface of Europa, a young commander named Elias Rourke stood before a wall-sized hologram of the same star map the Zareth had mocked. His jaw tight, eyes sharp. "They laughed at us," he said softly, his voice shaking not with fear but fury. "And that's the last sound they'll make before they remember who we are." Beside him, an older woman, Admiral Sarah Tanaka, placed a hand on his shoulder, her expression grim but calm. "Then we give them a reason to fear," she said. "We do what humans have always done when the universe underestimates us. We adapt. We evolve, we endure." The room was filled with men and women, pilots, engineers, strategists, scientists, all silent, all listening. The air heavy with determination. "Project Lazarus," Tanaka continued, her eyes scanning the room, "begins tonight, across the table." A technician entered command codes, activating hundreds of dormant satellites. The lights flickered as deep beneath Earth's oceans, long-buried shipyards rumbled to life. Machines older than any living human whirred, their engines whispering like ghosts waking from long sleep. Meanwhile, on the Zareth capital world, the Emperor sat on his throne of light. Surrounded by luxury and deception, his court sang songs of victory. Planets burned in his name, and yet, deep in the back of his mind, a thought festered. What if he was wrong? What if the humans were not what they seemed? But arrogance crushed doubt as easily as the Empire crushed worlds. "They are nothing," he told himself, "nothing but insects crawling on a rock." Still, he couldn't shake the unease because the universe had patterns, and every empire that had ever risen before them had fallen when it began to believe itself immortal. But the Zareth were blind to the one species that learned faster than any other, that turned every defeat into fuel, every scar into strategy. Humanity didn't conquer by strength, they conquered by will. And though no one yet saw it, The seeds of the Empire's fall had already been planted the moment they laughed. In the deserts of Mars, under the thin red sky, soldiers trained in silence, their movements precise, their faces cold. These were not the dreamers or wanderers of old Earth. These were warriors forged by desperation, their armor black, their eyes hidden behind visors that reflected only determination. In orbit, massive carriers drifted unseen, their hulls wrapped in cloaking technology derived from alien ruins humanity had once scavenged. "Let them think we are weak," one instructor said, pacing before his recruits. "Let them laugh, because when we come, they won't even see it happen." His words echoed across the ranks like prophecy. Every soldier knew the truth. The galaxy didn't believe in humanity, and that was their greatest weapon. In the deep labs beneath Antarctica, engineers worked in silence, creating machines that defied imagination, weapons that could pierce through dimensions of light, drones that thought faster than any biological mind, reactors that could power entire fleets unseen. Every creation born not from greed but from necessity, from survival. "They call us emotional," one scientist muttered, wiping grease from his hands. "They're right. We build with emotion, with memory, and that's what they'll never understand." His partner smiled faintly. "That's why we'll win, because they fight for power. We fight because we remember." Outside the lab, the auroras danced over the frozen world, as if the heavens themselves were watching humanity's quiet rebirth. On the day the Emperor announced a new campaign of expansion, the galaxy cheered. The Empire's fleets lit the void like a storm, thousands of ships ready to crush another corner of space. The broadcast spread across the stars, every world under their rule forced to watch. "Today," the Emperor declared, his voice echoing through billions of screens, "we remind the galaxy who commands it." His smile was sharp, his arrogance endless, "And if any small, forgotten race dares to defy us, they will learn their place," the crowd roared. But far away, on a small ship hidden beyond Pluto's orbit, a group of humans watched the same broadcast in silence. Commander Rourke leaned forward, his voice low. "He's already learning." His co-pilot looked at him in confusion. "Learning what?" Rourke's eyes gleamed coldly. "That the quiet ones are always the ones you should fear." And as the Emperor's laughter filled the galaxy once more, Earth's silent fleet moved deeper into the black. Weeks turned into months. Rumors began to spread across the outer colonies of the Empire. Whispers of missing fleets, of systems that went dark without warning, of strange signals that sounded almost human. The Emperor dismissed them as superstition, but fear had already begun to crawl through the ranks. Some soldiers spoke of ghosts, ships that appeared out of nowhere, struck without firing and vanished into nothing. Others said they heard music in the static before their systems shut down, an old human melody that no one could trace. The Empire's arrogance began to crack, but it was too late. Because the humans had already moved beyond the point of no return. They were no longer defending, they were preparing to teach, and on Earth, in a chamber deep beneath the surface, Admiral Tanaka stood before a giant screen filled with the images of Zareth cities glowing like stars. Her hands clasped behind her back. "They see us as ants," she said quietly, "but even ants can destroy giants if they move as one." Beside her, Commander Rourke nodded, his face calm but fierce. "Then let's remind them what humans do best." She turned to him. "And what is that, Commander?" He smiled faintly. "We adapt, we endure, and when they underestimate us, we make them pay." The lights dimmed as the screens flickered to black. One word appeared across every terminal: "Initiate." The hum of the reactors grew louder. The ocean stirred as submerged carriers began to rise, wings unfolding, engines igniting one by one. They ascended through the waves into the sky, cutting through clouds like blades. The people of Earth stood on the shores watching in awe, not in fear, not in hatred, but in unity. They didn't cheer, they didn't shout. They simply watched their world finally rise, and in that silence the stars trembled. Because somewhere deep in the cosmos, the Zareth Empire was still laughing, unaware that the joke was no longer theirs, for humanity had heard it, remembered it, and turned that laughter into the sound of their awakening. As the fleet left orbit, the last rays of sunlight glimmered over Earth's oceans, painting the sky in gold and blue, and the transmission from the flagship Aegis echoed through every human ship. "For too long they thought us weak." The captain's voice rang steady and strong. "For too long they forgot who we are. Today we remind them. Today we show the stars that humanity is never to be underestimated again." And as the fleet vanished into the void, the stars that once laughed seemed to grow silent. For something had awakened that could not be stopped. The galaxy's era of arrogance was ending, and in its place the age of humanity was about to begin. The darkness between stars was alive with movement, silent shapes gliding through the void like predators in deep water. The human fleet that had risen from Earth's oceans now drifted across the edge of Zareth-controlled space. Invisible, cold, waiting. Each ship carried a silence so heavy it could crush breath itself. Inside the command deck of the flagship Aegis, Commander Elias Rourke stood before a holographic display of the Empire's patrol routes, his reflection a faint ghost in the blue light. "They won't see us coming," said his second officer, her voice tight with anticipation. Rourke didn't look away from the map. "They don't believe we can come," he replied softly. "And that's why they'll lose." Across the fleet, crews whispered to each other in low tones. Engineers adjusted ancient systems built in secret decades ago. Soldiers polished their armor not out of vanity, but ritual. This wasn't conquest. This was an answer to laughter, a promise made to silence. Far away, deep inside the Zareth military station orbiting the moon of Vetra, alarms flickered briefly and died again. The officers on duty barely noticed. To them, humans were myths, background noise in the grand design of their empire. The station's commander lounged in his chair, glass of glowing blue liquid in his hand. "Increase power to the scanners," he ordered lazily. "We have smugglers nearby." His lieutenant nodded, bored. "Yes, Commander," adjusting parameters. But the scanners showed nothing, only the endless black. Seconds later, the lights dimmed for a moment. Systems flickered, then stabilized. The commander frowned. "Report." But before anyone could respond, the viewing glass began to darken. Not from shadow, but from something blocking the stars outside. A vast shape drifting silently, no engines visible, no lights, no signal, just darkness. It moved slowly across the window like a mountain in space. And then, in a flash of light too fast to register, the station was gone, vaporized before the alarms could even sound. All that remained was dust and silence, carried away by the current of the void. On the Aegis, Rourke watched the explosion fade on the monitor, his jaw tightening. "One down," he murmured. "No survivors." His comms officer turned toward him, voice steady but eyes wide. "That was the largest station in the outer sector, sir. They'll know now." Rourke shook his head slowly. "No, they'll deny it. They'll say it was an accident. Arrogance always blinds before fear." He turned toward the crew, his expression calm but electric. "We move deeper. No signals, no trace, until they finally start to feel it." He paused, his eyes narrowing. "Until they finally realize that humanity has returned." News of the destruction reached the Zareth capital within days, but it was buried by propaganda. The Empire's ministers laughed it off, calling it a reactor malfunction. The Emperor smiled before the cameras and promised to inspect the failure personally. The galaxy continued as if nothing had changed. Trade routes open, fleets moving, worlds celebrating. But beneath that calm veneer, a quiet unease began to grow, because more systems started to go dark. Patrols disappeared without a trace. Colonies stopped transmitting. Entire supply convoys never arrived. Each disappearance separated by silence. No distress calls, no warning, just sudden emptiness. The Zareth admirals called emergency meetings, projecting holograms of red zones expanding like blood across their maps. "It's pirates," one said. "No," argued another. "It's sabotage." But then a single signal appeared in the system logs, a signal encoded in an ancient Terran frequency, 4 simple words, transmitted only once before vanishing again. "Do you remember us?" In the dim light of the Emperor's chamber, the message played again and again. His advisors watching nervously, none dared speak. The Emperor's fingers tapped the armrest of his throne, his golden eyes narrow. "Primitive, defiant," he said, voice calm but laced with fury. "Send the Second Fleet." I want every human settlement erased." The generals bowed and hurried to obey, not realizing that by the time their ships reached human space, there would be nothing to find, for the humans had already moved, no longer waiting in their own corner of the galaxy. They were everywhere. The Second Fleet departed from the Zareth stronghold at Vornus Prime, 700 warships stretching across the horizon like an iron storm. Their engines roared, their commanders confident, their soldiers laughing about the hunt. They called it the human cleansing, believing they would destroy the last remnants of a broken species. But when they jumped through hyperspace, their sensors immediately began to fail. The stars around them flickered wrong, their navigation screens twisted, and before they could react, half the fleet dropped out of hyperspace too early, emerging into the gravitational field of an unknown planet. Their systems went dead, and then from the darkness above, small black ships appeared, unmarked, silent, invisible until they fired. The human weapons were not beams or plasma. They were pulses of compressed light that bent reality. Ships split apart in perfect silence. No explosions, no smoke, just a flash, then nothing. Within minutes, the Second Fleet was gone, erased so completely that not even debris remained, only static drifting through space. On the Aegis, the bridge was lit by the soft glow of tactical screens. Rourke watched as the last Zareth ship vanished from the display. His officers clapped quietly, not celebrating but relieved. "That's the last of them," someone whispered. Rourke shook his head. "No, this is just the beginning." His voice carried no pride, only the weight of inevitability. "The Empire won't understand what's happening until they start to panic." He looked out into the void, and panic makes empires crumble faster than bullets. Across the galaxy, the panic began. Slowly, subtly but unstoppable. Governors stopped sending reports. Mining worlds sent frantic transmissions before falling silent. Military command stations were found empty, ships adrift with no crew, their systems rewired to broadcast the same message. Over and over, they underestimated us. The Emperor's ministers stopped laughing. Their meetings grew tense, their voices louder. The word human began to sound like a curse whispered in fear. "They're ghosts," one general said. "They're everywhere and nowhere." Another slammed his fist on the table. "We are the Zareth Empire. We do not fear." But his voice trembled, because deep down, he already did. On the far side of the galaxy, in the ruins of an old Terran colony once destroyed by the Zareth centuries ago, human soldiers gathered under the flickering lights of a rebuilt outpost. The flag of Earth fluttered faintly in the airless wind. Commander Rourke arrived in his shuttle, stepping onto the cracked surface. He knelt and pressed his gloved hand against the ground, feeling the faint hum of the planet's new core generator. "They burned this world to prove a point," he said quietly. "Now it's where their empire begins to die." The soldiers stood silently, some removing their helmets, their faces young but hard, their eyes reflecting both anger and awe. "They wanted us to fear them," one said softly. "But they forgot something." Rourke looked up. "What's that?" The soldier smiled faintly. "Humans don't break, we adapt." That night, as human ships moved like whispers between the stars, the Zareth fleets searched desperately for an enemy that wouldn't stand still. Their scanners picked up phantom signatures, ghost readings, impossible heat traces, every time they prepared for an attack. Nothing came, and every time they relaxed, another world fell silent. The Emperor began to dream of blue light, always blue, always silent, until he would wake drenched in sweat, his heart pounding, hearing the faint echo of human voices through the walls of his palace. "You thought we were weak," they whispered. "You thought we would kneel." In the command deck of Aegis, Rourke stood before his crew, a faint smile ghosting across his face. "They're afraid," he said softly, "and fear is a weapon sharper than any blade." His eyes hardened. "Now we make them see us." He turned to his communications officer. "Transmit to all fleets, message code Delta." She hesitated. "That's the declaration, sir." He nodded. "Yes, it's time." She entered the sequence, her fingers trembling slightly, across the stars. Hundreds of hidden Terran ships received the command. And for the first time in a century, the name of Earth echoed across galactic frequencies, the signal clear and strong. This is humanity, and we remember. Every world heard it. From the core systems to the distant colonies, every being stopped what they were doing and looked to the sky. The Zareth Empire froze. The galaxy held its breath, and for the first time in generations, Earth spoke. Not in laughter, not in plea, but in promise, a voice reborn from silence, calm, measured, unstoppable. The same voice that had once been mocked now carried the weight of a storm, and somewhere deep within the darkness the Emperor stared at the stars. Realizing that the mistake had already been made, the laughter that once filled his hall had become his curse, and the price was coming. The Zareth Empire was no longer laughing, though no one dared to say it aloud. Fear had become a shadow in every corridor, every council meeting. Every whisper that passed through the Emperor's palace carried the same unease. Something was happening in the dark, something they could not see or predict. The humans had vanished centuries ago into their quiet corner of the stars, and now they were everywhere, yet nowhere. Haunting every border, every ship, every dream, the Empire's pride was starting to fracture under the weight of that silence. In the war command room, Admiral Varen slammed his clawed hand against the table, holograms flickering with the faces of his sub-commanders. 30 patrols lost, he roared, his golden eyes flaring with fury. 30 patrols and not one survivor. Are you telling me the humans did this? Primitive apes? But no one answered, because deep down even the most arrogant among them had begun to believe the truth. Those ships didn't just vanish, they were taken, erased by something far beyond the Empire's understanding. Across the galaxy, human fleets moved like ghosts, slipping through void space undetected. They attacked without noise, without light, without warning. No messages, no demands, only the aftermath. When the wreckage of Imperial ships drifted silently past abandoned stations, each one carved with a single symbol, the blue circle of Earth, nothing more, nothing less. And that single mark spread terror faster than any weapon could. Soldiers refused to deploy. Governors begged for reinforcements, and for the first time in centuries the Empire's fleets began to retreat. On board the human flagship Aegis, Commander Elias Rourke watched the transmissions quietly, his hands folded behind his back, the ghostly glow of the holograms painting his face in blue light. "They're starting to remember us," his second officer whispered. Rourke nodded slowly. "Good, that's the first step," she frowned. "The first step toward what?" He turned to her, his eyes calm but heavy. "Toward understanding why they should have never laughed." Back on Zareth Prime, the Emperor sat in his chamber surrounded by silence, the usual music of the court replaced by reports of disaster. His ministers bowed low before him, terrified. "Your Majesty," one stammered. "We have confirmed. It is humanity. Their technology has advanced far beyond projections." The Emperor's claws tightened on the armrest, his voice cold. "Impossible, they are insects." But his words were cut short by a sudden flicker of light. Every screen in the room went black, replaced by static, then by a single image, a planet, blue and white, shining like a jewel, and a voice, deep, human, steady, speaking through the distortion. "You called us weak," it said. "You called us primitive, emotional, fragile," the static hissed. "You forgot what emotion creates: hope, unity, purpose." And then the image vanished. Leaving only silence, the Emperor stared at the empty screens, his breath uneven, and for the first time, he felt something he hadn't known in centuries. Fear. On board Aegis, Rourke watched the recorded transmission that had just been sent to the Emperor. His face unreadable, his officer glanced at him. "You think he'll respond?" Rourke's voice was quiet, almost mournful. "He already has." With everything he built outside the window, human ships drifted past the glowing remains of another Zareth convoy, the stars reflecting off their black hulls. For centuries, humanity had been silent, patient, listening while the galaxy mocked them. And now that silence had turned into a storm that spoke through action, not words. Every destroyed fleet, every terrified transmission was a message, a mirror held up to the Empire's arrogance, showing them their own cruelty, magnified and returned. On the outskirts of a dead colony world, where once human children had been enslaved under the Zareth's control, human marines walked among the ruins. The ground cracked and dry, the air filled with dust. They wore black armor that gleamed faintly under the red sun, their faces hidden behind helmets. One of them knelt beside a rusted sign half buried in the sand. It read in faded letters, "Colony of New Horizon." He brushed off the dust and whispered, "They burned this place," his voice trembling with anger. Another soldier placed a hand on his shoulder. "Not anymore," he said softly. "Now they remember the fire we carry." Above them, human dropships ascended into the clouds, the sunlight glinting off their wings like angels rising from the ashes. Back on Zareth Prime, panic spread through the Empire's cities for the first time in recorded history. There were riots in the capital. Civilians screamed in the streets, staring at the sky every time the power flickered. "The humans are coming," they cried. "They're here." Entire neighborhoods emptied as people fled toward underground shelters. And above it all, the Emperor sat in silence, staring out at the horizon, where distant lights flickered like ghosts. His advisor approached cautiously. "Your Majesty, our scanners are detecting strange signals, frequencies beyond our range." The Emperor didn't look away. "They're not attacking?" he asked, his voice quiet. "No, sire." "Not yet," the Emperor exhaled slowly. "That's worse," he said, "because it means they want us to listen." Across the stars, the Empire's fleets began broadcasting messages of peace, desperate calls for negotiation, pleas for understanding, but no one answered. Humanity's silence was more terrifying than any threat, because silence meant they were still there, watching, waiting, deciding. It was a silence that carried judgment, a silence that spoke of patience born from pain. On Aegis, Rourke stood before his crew, their faces pale but resolute. "They're breaking," one officer said. "What are you? Should we push further?" Rourke shook his head. "No, not yet. The lesson isn't complete." His voice was steady, but behind his calm, his heart ached, because every act of revenge carried the memory of those who had suffered. "We are not monsters," he reminded his crew softly. "We are what they made us. And that's what they must see." And so the humans waited, unseen but ever present, their ships hidden among the nebulae, their drones shadowing every Imperial fleet, every command signal intercepted, every secret laid bare. The Zareth Empire that once called itself eternal now trembled under the weight of its own guilt. And as the Emperor stared into the night sky, he saw a new star appear, a faint blue shimmer that hadn't been there before, growing brighter, pulsing like a heartbeat. He didn't understand what it was, but something deep inside him knew. It wasn't a star, it was Earth answering at last. And though it was light years away, he could swear he heard the faint echo of a human voice carried through the void. Calm, sorrowful, inevitable. "We remember." The Zareth Empire stood on the edge of panic, their perfect order crumbling beneath the weight of silence. Cities that once glowed with pride were now dimmed with fear. Every corridor, every command post, every palace chamber hummed with tension that no one dared to speak aloud. It was as if the stars themselves had turned against them, as if the universe was punishing them for their arrogance. And through that vast black silence, humanity watched, patient and calculating, their fleets hidden behind veils of light and shadow, moving through hyperspace like ghosts, unseen but ever present. The once forgotten children of Earth had become something else entirely, a myth wrapped in vengeance, a story told in whispers, a truth too painful for empires to face. In the grand hall of the Zareth throne world, the Emperor stood before the council, his golden armor gleaming faintly under the pale lights, his expression cold and unyielding. "You will not tell me," he said softly, his voice trembling with quiet fury, "that primitive creatures from a forgotten rock have brought fear into my empire." But even as he spoke, his generals avoided his eyes. One of them stepped forward, hands shaking. "Your Majesty, the reports cannot be denied. Every fleet we send vanishes. Every station we rebuild falls again within hours. They leave no wreckage, no evidence. Nothing." The Emperor's gaze sharpened. "Nothing," he repeated. The general nodded. "Only symbols, my lord, the circle of blue and silver. Burned into the hulls of our ships, carved into the dust of our planets." The Emperor turned slowly, his jaw tightening. "Earth," he whispered. The word felt strange in his mouth, bitter like poison, and in that single breath, he understood what his laughter had cost him. Far across the stars, aboard the human flagship Aegis, Commander Elias Rourke stood before the viewing glass, his reflection faint against the swirling nebula beyond, his hands clasped behind his back. "Transmission from the Empire." "Sir," his communications officer said quietly. "They request dialogue. They ask for peace talks." Rourke's expression didn't change, but his voice dropped lower, softer. Now they remember the meaning of peace, he said. Now that they can taste their own fear, the officer hesitated. Should we respond? Rourke shook his head slowly. No, let them wait. Silence will teach them more than words ever could. He turned toward the crew, his voice calm but heavy. They think we fight out of anger. But this isn't anger. This is memory. This is justice. On the Emperor's flagship, the Vornus Crown, the stars looked strange through the observation dome, distorted, distant. His advisors crowded behind him, whispering among themselves. They don't want to rule us, one muttered. They want us to understand. Another hissed, understand what? The Emperor turned toward them, his voice sharp. That we are not gods, he said quietly, shocking even himself. That we are just as mortal as they are. He closed his eyes briefly, hearing again the human transmission that had haunted his sleep for weeks. You called us weak, but weakness is what taught us strength. Suddenly, alarms blared across the ship, red lights flashing. Unidentified vessels closing fast. The captain shouted, They're within the perimeter. The Emperor gripped the railing, his voice shaking. Shields up, prepare to fire. But before the command could be executed, every screen went dark, every engine shut down, and for a heartbeat, time itself seemed to stop. Outside, thousands of human ships appeared from the black, their hulls absorbing light, their formation perfect, their silence suffocating. The Emperor stared through the glass, his heart pounding. He had never seen ships move like that. No signals, no communication, only precision and purpose. A black armada that had come not for conquest, but for revelation. His voice broke as he whispered, Impossible. But deep down he already knew. Humanity had arrived. On the Aegis, Rourke stood motionless as the human fleet surrounded the Zareth homeworld, his crew silent, waiting. No strikes, he said quietly. Hold positions. His second officer frowned. Sir, we can end it right now. Rourke's eyes softened. No, he said. We're not here to destroy. We're here to remind. His voice carried the weight of generations. We could burn their world, but that would make us like them, and humanity has already seen what that leads to. Outside, the ships held their place, their engines glowing faintly blue, surrounding the Empire's capital like a halo of light and vengeance. From the surface, billions looked up in terror as the sky filled with the silent gleam of Terran steel. No sound, no threat, only judgment. On the palace balcony, the Emperor stepped out alone. The night sky above his world, no longer black, but filled with blue light, the same color he had seen in his dreams. He could hear the faint hum of the ships above, constant and unrelenting. He raised his voice to the heavens. What do you want from us? He shouted, his voice echoing across the plaza. What more do you seek? For a long time there was no answer, and then softly through every speaker, every frequency, every piece of communication tech in the Empire, a single voice replied, calm and human. Nothing, it said. We only wanted you to listen. The words struck like lightning, and then the silence returned, deeper and heavier than before. The Emperor fell to his knees, his people watching from the streets. No explosions came, no fire rained from the sky, only that unbearable silence, that reflection of guilt and shame that had haunted them since the first human fleet struck, because they understood now. This was not war. This was revelation. Humanity wasn't here to conquer. They were here to show the cost of arrogance, the price of cruelty. On the Aegis, Rourke watched the feet of the Emperor kneeling before the sky, his voice quiet as he whispered. He understands now. His officer turned to him. Is it over? Rourke closed his eyes. No, not yet, he said. It ends when they remember who they used to be, when the fear fades into understanding. He looked out at the stars. We've done enough for now. He ordered the fleet to withdraw, and one by one the ships vanished back into the darkness, their blue engines fading like falling stars. In the days that followed, the Zareth Empire dismantled its war fleets, Their factories went silent, and their armies disbanded. The Emperor addressed the galaxy in a trembling voice, his once proud tone replaced by humility. "We mocked them," he said, "and they answered not with destruction, but with truth. We called them weak, but they showed us mercy, and mercy is the sharpest blade of all." His image was broadcast across every planet, every species, and everywhere. The galaxy fell silent, listening, because those words carried more power than any weapon ever could. Back on Earth, the oceans shimmered under golden dawn. The fleet had returned home, their mission complete. The people gathered along the coasts to watch the ships descend through the clouds, the sound of engines mixing with the wind like a heartbeat. Rourke stood on the bridge of the Aegis, his gaze fixed on the planet below. "We didn't just make them fear us," he murmured. "We made them remember us." His voice broke slightly. "And that's all we ever wanted." As the ship entered the atmosphere, the sunlight caught the hull, making it glow like a blade of silver light cutting through the clouds. The earth below stretched vast and endless, beautiful and alive, and for the first time in centuries, humanity could look to the stars not with anger, but with quiet pride, because they had reclaimed something no empire could take: respect. The stars burned softly above the silent galaxy. The war was over, but the memory of it clung to every world like a shadow that would never fade. The Zarath Empire, once proud and unshakable, was now hollow, its fleets grounded, its cities dimmed, its leaders broken. The Emperor himself no longer wore his crown of light. Instead, he sat alone in the great hall that had once echoed with laughter, staring at the shattered throne before him. The same throne from which he had mocked humanity, the same throne where he had declared Earth too weak to matter. The hall was empty now, dust falling through beams of dying sunlight, and in that silence, he whispered the words that had haunted him every night since the Terran fleet appeared above his world. We should have listened. Outside, the skies above Zarath were calm again. No blue glow, no shadows of Terran ships, but the people still looked upward every night, waiting, half in fear, half in reverence, because the silence humanity left behind was heavier than any army. Across the galaxy, remnants of the Empire's territories began to rebuild, not under banners of conquest, but under quiet treaties of surrender. And at the center of it all stood the symbol humanity had carved into history: a blue circle crossed with a silver line, not the mark of dominance, but of remembrance. Colonies once enslaved under Zarath rule now rebuilt themselves freely, and for the first time, their leaders spoke the word Earth, not as an insult, but as a promise, a symbol of hope, and even fear. For the name alone carried a weight that silence could not hide. Traders whispered it in hushed voices, scholars wrote about it in reverent tones, and soldiers, even those who had never seen a human, saluted the stars before battle, fearing that somewhere in the darkness, the blue ships still waited. On Earth, the oceans shimmered with the light of dawn. The planet had changed, but not in the way the galaxy imagined. There were no grand monuments, no golden statues of heroes, only quiet cities surrounded by forests, families walking along rebuilt streets. The people of Earth had no need for celebration. Their victory was not in conquest, but in survival, in proving that they could rise, endure, and forgive. Commander Elias Rourke walked along the shore of the Pacific, his boots leaving faint prints in the sand. The waves brushed against them gently before erasing them, just as time erases everything except truth. Behind him, the hum of Terran ships could still be heard far above the atmosphere, silent guardians orbiting a planet that no longer needed to fight, yet still remained ready, because humanity knew better than anyone that peace was fragile, and arrogance always returns. He paused by the water, pulling a small device from his pocket. It projected a flickering image, old and faded, of his mother smiling in a field beneath an open sky. She had died long before the war, long before the galaxy ever learned to fear the word human, but her voice lived in his memory, gentle and strong. "Eli, remember, strength isn't in the fire we can start. It's in the fire we choose not to." The wind carried the sound of the ocean over him, and his throat tightened as he whispered back, "I remembered, Mom. I remembered." Behind him, the sunset stretched across the horizon, painting the world in gold. And for a fleeting moment, he thought of all the worlds that had once laughed, now quiet, all the stars that had once ignored them, now watching, and he realized that this silence, was humanity's greatest victory. Meanwhile, far away on Zareth Prime, the Emperor's last advisor approached him with a trembling voice. "Your Majesty, the Council of Worlds requests your statement." The Emperor looked up slowly, his face pale and worn, his golden eyes dim. "Statement?" he repeated. "I have no statement," his voice cracked. "What can I say to the stars that they have not already heard from the humans?" He stood weakly, looking toward the broken window where the light of the twin moons fell upon the floor. "Tell them," he said after a long pause. "Tell them we finally understand," the advisor hesitated. "Understand what, sire?" The Emperor's gaze drifted to the horizon, where the ruins of his once great capital lay. "That power means nothing if you cannot control the cruelty inside it. That silence is the loudest voice in the universe." His words were barely a whisper now, and that mercy is the only language worth speaking. The transmission was sent, not just to the Council, but across the entire galaxy, and it became known as the Emperor's apology. The message spread like fire through the stars. Many ignored it, some mocked it, but most listened, because behind the trembling voice of a fallen ruler was a truth that could not be denied. Humanity had changed the galaxy, not with domination, but with restraint, not with conquest, but with the courage to stop when victory was already theirs, and that act of mercy burned brighter than any weapon could. Species that once bowed to the Zareth now began to raise banners of independence, their flags carrying traces of blue in honor of the world that had shown them what true power looked like. It wasn't the power to destroy, but the power to choose not to. In the Terran Command Center orbiting Luna, the halls were quiet, the War Council long disbanded, yet the spirit of vigilance remained. Holographic maps flickered softly in the air, marking the systems now under the Treaty of Remembrance. Admiral Sarah Tanaka stood before the display, her hands clasped behind her back. "So many lives," she murmured, "so much loss. For them to finally see us beside her." A young officer spoke softly. "Was it worth it, Admiral?" She turned to him, her expression calm but sad. "Nothing worth having comes without pain," she said. "But what matters is what we do with that pain. We can turn it into revenge, or we can turn it into peace." She looked out the window, where the blue light of Earth reflected off the glass. "I think we chose right." Back on the surface, the people of Earth built gardens where bunkers once stood. Children played in streets that were once evacuation routes, and elders told stories of the days when the stars mocked them, and how those same stars learned to listen. Schools no longer taught of war as glory, but as warning. Every lesson began with the same words carved on monuments across the planet: "Never mistake silence for surrender." And beyond the human system, scattered colonies sent small beacons into the void. Not weapons, not warnings, but music, old Earth songs, soft and wordless, carried through the dark like lullabies. And when they reached the edge of Zareth space, the once mighty empire listened in silence, and many wept. As night fell again over Earth, Commander Rourke stood beneath the stars, his reflection caught in the quiet waves. His heart heavy but full, he whispered to the sky, "They finally know who we are." The stars above shimmered faintly as if in answer. He turned to leave, his boots crunching against the sand, and behind him, the tide erased his footprints once more. Because that was how humanity moved forward. Not in the noise of glory, but in the quiet persistence of those who refused to disappear. The universe had mocked them, but now it remembered them, and for as long as the stars burned, it always would. The years that followed were unlike any the galaxy had ever seen. Peace had returned, but it was not the kind of peace born from treaties or signatures. It was the kind of peace that comes when the universe finally remembers what fear feels like. The name human no longer echoed as a joke in alien halls. It was spoken carefully now, respectfully, with a kind of reverence that bordered on awe. Even the Zareth, once the proud masters of half the galaxy, lowered their banners in humility. The laughter that had once filled their great council halls had been replaced by silence, a silence that stretched across worlds, a silence that reminded them of blue ships hovering above their skies, of the moment when they saw mercy instead of fire, and that silence became their teacher. It taught them to be better than what they had been, to measure their power not by how loudly they could conquer, but by how quietly they could rebuild. On Earth, life began to bloom again. Green fields returned where battlefields once burned. The oceans glittered with life that had been gone for generations, and cities grew not upward but outward, designed to breathe with the world instead of choke it. Humanity had changed too. They were still strong, still watchful, still capable of striking with the same precision that had shattered an empire, but they had learned restraint. They had learned that the greatest strength of all was knowing when to stop. Commander Elias Rourke stood on a balcony overlooking the city of New Geneva. The sky painted in gold by the setting sun. His reflection glimmered faintly on the glass. Behind him, Admiral Sarah Tanaka approached, her footsteps soft against the polished floor. "The Council of Worlds has accepted the new treaty," she said quietly. "Zareth has agreed to disarm completely." Rourke didn't turn at first. He only nodded. "Then it's finally over," he murmured. But the tone of his voice was not victory. It was exhaustion, the exhaustion of a man who had carried too much for too long. Admiral Tanaka stepped beside him, her eyes following his gaze over the city. "Do you ever think about what we could have done?" she asked softly. "We could have taken everything. The whole galaxy was at our mercy." Rourke exhaled, his voice quiet. "That's exactly why we didn't, Admiral. Mercy is the one thing that makes us human, and the one thing they could never understand." He turned to look at her, his eyes heavy but warm. "We showed them that forgiveness isn't weakness. It's a strength they can't comprehend," she nodded slowly. "You think they'll remember?" He smiled faintly. "For 1,000 years," he said. "And if they ever forget, the silence will remind them." Far away on Zareth Prime, the Emperor walked through the ruins of his palace. The marble cracked, the golden pillars broken, weeds growing through the stone. There were no guards now. No courtiers, no advisors, only ghosts and wind. He stopped at the shattered steps where his throne had once stood, placing his trembling hand on the cold stone. His reflection stared back at him in the faint puddle beneath. Old, weary, no longer a god among stars. Just a man who had lost everything to his pride, he whispered to himself. "They could have ended us," his voice shook, "but they didn't. Why?" His advisor, the last one who had stayed, stepped forward carefully. "Because they are what we pretended to be." "Majesty?" The Emperor closed his eyes, the weight of those words pressing against his heart. "Then they are the true rulers of this galaxy," he said softly. "Not because they conquered it, but because they earned it." The Emperor's apology, broadcast years before, became the foundation of a new age, a golden era born from shame and reflection. Children across alien worlds studied the story of Earth in their schools, learned of the years of silence, of the blue ships that appeared and vanished like spirits of justice. They learned that mercy could stop wars faster than destruction, and that humanity's greatest weapon was not its technology, but its heart. Poets from distant systems wrote songs about the silent dawn, the moment the galaxy begged for mercy and humanity gave it, and those songs spread even to worlds that had never seen a human. The melody of survival turned into legend, and humanity itself became more than a species, it became a lesson. Yet even as peace spread, humanity did not grow complacent. The Terran Defense Fleet remained, not as an army, but as a guardian watching quietly from the shadows of the outer systems. They didn't need to show their presence anymore. The idea of them was enough. The memory of what they had done was enough. And in that quiet vigilance, they found purpose again. To protect, not to punish, to guide, not to rule. Commander Rourke returned to orbit after the treaty was signed. The stars stretched endlessly before him, glittering like old promises. He walked the silent corridors of the Aegis, his hand brushing along the walls that still bore the scars of war. "You've seen too much," he whispered to the ship as if it could hear him. "But you've brought us home." He stopped by the viewing deck, the Earth below glowing in blue serenity. "You've done your duty," he said softly, his voice breaking. "Now rest." In the quiet of the Terran command room, messages arrived daily from worlds once ruled by the Empire. Letters of gratitude, of apology, of respect. The humans read them but never replied. They didn't need to. The silence was their answer. Their silence was peace. It told the galaxy that Earth did not need validation. It needed only memory. Because memory was what made humans dangerous. Not weapons, not ships, but the ability to remember pain and still choose mercy. And so, the universe adjusted around that truth. New governments rose, alliances formed, all of them carrying the mark of Earth's philosophy, strength through restraint. One night, Rourke stood alone beneath the great sky dome of the New Geneva Memorial, a monument made not of metal or marble but of light, shifting blue and white like the reflection of the sea. Names of the fallen scrolled endlessly along its edges. Soldiers, engineers, civilians, all those who had given their lives so humanity could stand. He looked at the names, his throat tightening as he whispered, "They'll never laugh at us again. You did that, not me, not the fleet." "You did?" A tear slid down his cheek. "Catching the light, you made them see outside." The wind whispered softly through the trees, carrying the sound of the ocean even this far inland. And for the first time in many years, Rourke smiled, not in triumph, but in peace. Across the galaxy, under 1,000 alien skies, the stars seemed a little brighter, a little calmer, the scars of war fading slowly into memory. And in every corner of space, when ships crossed into human territory, they broadcast one phrase automatically out of respect, a simple transmission carried through the static: "Permission to enter, with peace." And Earth always answered with silence, not because it refused, but because it accepted, because silence had become its language, a sacred reminder that some things didn't need words, they just needed to be understood. And so, as the night stretched over Earth, and the blue light of dawn began to touch the horizon once more, humanity watched the stars with quiet eyes, no longer seeking conquest, no longer needing validation. They had proven who they were, and the galaxy would never forget. The laughter that once mocked them had become legend. The silence that followed had become truth, and somewhere, far beyond the reach of even the most distant suns, the universe itself seemed to whisper in the stillness. The humans endured. The stars drifted quietly above Earth, shining like memories frozen in time, each one carrying the echo of battles fought, of lessons learned, of voices that would never be forgotten. Humanity had become something the galaxy could no longer define. Not an empire, not a conqueror, but a presence, a promise that silence could hold more power than war, more truth than words, and more mercy than any treaty. The universe had changed since the day humans rose from their blue world. And even now, centuries later, their names still carried the same weight, whispered not in fear anymore, but in reverence, in awe, in gratitude, for the ones who had taught the stars humility. Commander Elias Rourke sat alone on the cliff above the Atlantic, the sound of the waves below crashing softly against the rocks, the wind cold but alive. The sky open and endless. He looked older now, lines tracing the map of his years. But his eyes still carried that same quiet fire, that human fire that refused to die. He stared at the horizon and smiled faintly. "We didn't just survive," he whispered to the sea. "We remembered." Behind him, the faint hum of an approaching shuttle filled the air, landing silently on the shore. The ramp opened and Admiral Sarah Tanaka stepped out. Her hair silver now, her posture still straight as ever. She walked toward him, her boots crunching over the sand, stopping beside him without saying a word for a long time. They both just watched the waves together, the silence between them filled with the comfort of understanding. Finally she spoke, her voice soft but steady. "They've built the monument," he turned to her, his brow lifting slightly. "The one on Luna?" She nodded. "Yes, the galaxy came together for it. Every species, even the Zareth. It stands above the sea of tranquility, glowing blue like Earth from space. They say it's a symbol of everything we changed." Rourke chuckled softly. "We didn't change them, Sarah. They changed themselves when they saw what mercy looked like." She looked at him, her eyes shining with emotion. "You never forgave yourself for what we did," she said quietly. "For what we had to do." Rourke's gaze drifted back to the sea. "Forgiveness is for the innocent," he murmured. "We just carried the burden long enough to make sure no one else would." He fell silent again, the wind tugging gently at his coat. "But sometimes," he added, voice low, "I wonder if the stars would have learned without the fire." Tanaka's voice broke slightly. "Maybe not, Elias, but they'll remember the silence that followed it. And that's what matters." The shuttle that had brought her glowed faintly, its hull engraved with the same symbol the galaxy had come to fear and honor. The silver circle crossed with a single blue line, the mark of humanity, the mark that once terrified entire civilizations and now united them. Above them, the sky shimmered faintly as ships passed through the upper atmosphere. Transports, research vessels, peace envoys, all bearing Earth's insignia not as a threat but as a reminder. The galaxy had grown quieter since the wars, and in that quiet the stars seemed brighter. Rourke tilted his head upward, his eyes reflecting the light of the passing ships. "We built an empire of silence," he said softly. and somehow it was enough. Later that night, under the silver glow of the moon, Rourke and Tanaka boarded the shuttle bound for Luna, the hum of its engines a lullaby against the endless dark. As they broke through the atmosphere, the earth fell away beneath them, a blue jewel against the black, beautiful, fragile, eternal. They approached the monument that hung in lunar shadow, a massive sphere of light and stone, surrounded by floating beams inscribed with the names of every species that had signed the peace accords. But at its center, carved in flawless glass, was a single phrase: "They underestimated us." Below it, a smaller line glowed in faint gold: "And we forgave them." Rourke stood in silence, staring at the words, his heart heavy, tears tracing down his weathered cheeks. "They'll read that for 1,000 years, Tanaka said softly, "and still not understand what it cost." As the stars shimmered above, a voice echoed through the chamber, the voice of a young human girl from Earth, reading the speech that would be remembered for generations. "We are not gods," she said, her voice trembling but proud. "We are the children of a small blue world, and our greatest power has never been destruction. It has always been compassion. We rose not to rule but to remind the stars that every life, no matter how small, carries the same fire, the same hope, the same humanity." Her words hung in the air like music, and for a moment, even the stars seemed to listen. Rourke turned to leave the chamber, his gaze drifting one last time to the earth hanging in the distance. "That's what it was always about," he said quietly, "making them see that humanity isn't just a species, it's a choice." Tanaka placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then you made the right one," she said, and he smiled. "We all did?" His eyes softened as he whispered, "The galaxy won't laugh again, but I hope someday it will smile." Years later, long after Rourke was gone, ships from every corner of the universe came to visit the monument of humanity. Alien children pressed their hands against the glass, tracing the carved circle, whispering the names of those who had fallen, learning the story of the species that taught them what it meant to endure. And somewhere deep in space where no empire dared to go, a single human beacon still pulsed every 100 years, sending one message into the void: "We are still here." The signal traveled endlessly, a heartbeat in the dark, carrying with it the essence of everything Earth had ever been: hope, courage, mercy, and the fire to rise again. And so, the story of humanity became legend, passed from world to world, generation to generation, until it no longer mattered who remembered first or who forgot last, because the lesson itself had become eternal. The stars would never forget the day they underestimated a fragile blue planet, nor the mercy that followed for long after the laughter had faded and the wars had turned to dust. The silence of Earth still spoke, calm and unbroken.